All righty. Good Monday morning, everyone. Welcome, welcome. If you're not watching this on Monday, it's okay. But for those of you that are here live, thank you so much for joining us and saying hello and being a part of Deep Dive on Monday mornings. My name is Scott. I am hosting Deep Dive every Monday morning here at Central Oregon Recording, where we are going to be diving into different topics about recording and mixing to just give you a overall sense of what we do here, not to mention help hone your skills as a recording or mixing engineer. So we are a little ways through this series. We started this here in 2021. So today is January 25th. This is our fourth, I believe, our fourth installment of this series. We'll try and keep this series rolling. We do have a bunch of topics lined up, but if you have topics that you would like to know about, feel free to leave those topics in the comments below, and we will go through those and try and answer any questions or dive deeper into any of your questions so we can help you along your mixing journey. So today we are doing a look at building an analog workflow. So this is kind of stemming off the whole idea of recording or working in the computer, so in the box, and how to kind of get that analog sound when you are working inside a computer, because not all of us have access to a big $1 million studio with a lot of, outboard, or say a giant like Neve board or a Trident board, etc., or compressors, EQs, preamps, just all that kind of stuff. A lot of us work with just something smaller, say something from like Motu, Focusrite, PreSonus, Behringer, whatever kind of interface, just a clean digital interface. And we're trying to get some of that analog mojo to help our mixes kind of stick out and just kind of give them depth and like a beautiful like 3D image. So there are definitely ways to do that when you're working inside a computer, like in a DAW, and we're going to run through that of different options that are out there for you, and kind of just the whole way that signal flow works. Not everyone has actually been into an actual analog, like a giant studio, to understand how things happen, or even understand the process of what goes along when you're working from, say, something that was recorded and then it's mixed by another engineer and it moves on into mastering. So there's definitely a lot of jumping that's involved when you're dealing with that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's dive in and take a look. So here I just have a quick Pro Tools session pulled up so we can take a look at this. And real quick, I'm going to make a few adjustments here so we can really get moving here. All right. So I really don't have much going on right now. I basically just have this little EQ band is actually just doing a little bit of gain, and then also I am flipping the polarity on one side. This is for my drum rooms. And then I just have a little gain down, and then also just a limiter just kind of sitting here holding this down for us, going out to you guys, so that way we're not pushing too hard into Pro Tools or anything like that. All right. So the first thing to kind of discuss is how an analog workflow is going to look, or how we're going to design this. So this really comes down to what we want to accomplish, and how we feel that we would want this specific mix, this this song to be faux tracked. Now what I mean by that is typically you would go to a studio, let's say like a big studio with a giant, let's say like a Neve board, for example. And of course they would be able to plug into their board. They could use the preamps on the board. Say they had outboard that they could of course send things to, bring that back in. And maybe they print through tape, maybe not to tape, but at least through it, to kind of get that sound back into Pro Tools. And then that mix would then either get, it would be mixed there, that recording would be mixed there, or it would be sent off to another engineer to be mixed somewhere else. So that's kind of the first step. is kind of building what we want our sound to be and what we want to track through. Now, of course, if you want to get geeky, you can dive in and start reading up on, some of your favorite albums to try and figure out what they were recorded through. Trident, API, Neve, SSL, those are kind of like the big name recording boards that are out there. But of course, there are others. Focusrite, for example, when Rupert Neve broke off and made Focusrite board. So there's just a lot of options out there. So you kind of get to make that decision, and that could be a decision based on other albums that you've heard that you really enjoy the sound of. That could be based on maybe the sound that you're going for. Again, different boards are going to have different sounds, and we can kind of emulate that. So the first ones to look at would be from Slate Digital. Of course, if you've never checked them out, I do highly suggest it, but they make their virtual mix rack. This is like a subscription-based plugin. But as you can see, you kind of basically can build, it almost looks like a 500 series. You can build things across here. So you can kind of design what you're looking to do. So for example, let's say you wanted to go, we'll use Neve as an example. So you want to go through a Neve board. So we'd have, say, here's a preamp from a Neve, and then let's say FGN. So now we've got the EQ section of that. And then finally, they have the ability to model the actual circuitry of the channel, which if you look Brit N over here, that would be kind of like a basic setup if we were going through a Neve. So of course, Slate makes this, and they have different boards: SSL, API, Neve, Trident, and the RCA tube desk, like a broadcast desk. Now, these are meant to model the specific channels on the board. So just like if you were looking at something, say, in the live realm, like an analog board, you typically have strips, right? Strips that come down, and that has, say, like your preamp on top. Maybe it goes to like an EQ, maybe it has compression or gating or something like that, and then it has sends, and then it has a fader, or you can send that to multiple groups, etc. That's kind of how a board breaks down. It's like all of those knobs across the board. It's just individual channels. So once you've kind of learned one channel, you just do that for every channel that you're using. So this kind of emulates that, where you can kind of build your specific channel. And that's kind of how we start to emulate or start to understand how that works. Now, of course, again, with the Slate stuff, the virtual channel is modeling the circuitry of that specific channel. They also have something called the mix bus. So a lot of times, say you had like all of your drums, for example. So you had, say, 8 channels or 16 channels, whatever, of drums. You could then send those, say, to a bus on the console. And then you can, of course, do more kind of EQ work, dynamics. You can insert certain things there as well. And that kind of gives you an actual, like a mix bus. So as if you were routing out of the board into analog and then coming back into the bus, they make that as well. So there's different options there. Or, you could also think of it like a master bus idea. So they give you that option here with the VCC mix bus. So it's a little bit different than the channel because it's going to have different circuitry, different transformers, etc. So this is one option. Another option to look at, if we pull up anything from Brainworks, so Plugin Alliance does also their own thing, especially if you look at, like, say, their Mega Bundle. They do all kinds of stuff, but let's pull up their Neve version. So here we have their version of a Neve. And this is a little more in-depth because it gives you a little bit more. You can see we have a low-pass filter, a high-pass filter. We have some gains and stuff setting for our, like maybe our expander, or if we have a gate, things like that. So this is kind of nice. You can see here, gate down here. We've got keys even to do stuff. And then, of course, going into EQ, a pre-dynamic, so we can send the EQ before the compressor. And then, of course, virtual gains, if we want to like push the actual sound or saturation that's happening in there. We can also then, here with this one, the in gain, we can push into it harder there. And then, of course, we have a level out and the ability to randomize the channels. So something that Brainworks does with Plugin Alliance is they designed algorithms that will model individual channels, because the channels on, say, an analog console are not going to sound the same. They're going to be different from channel to channel, which even a lot of mixing engineers might have channels that they like specifically for certain instruments because of some specific mojo, EQ, saturation, etc. that is built into that channel. So you can actually go in and design this. So you can see I can flip through different channels here and pick the ones I want. You can even see they've got, I've never seen this, but a random like stick or something they get stuck in here. So that's kind of interesting. Anyway, you kind of get the idea. And of course, they do this for all different kind of consoles. So again, just like if we go back here to Slate and we look, API, again, Neve, Trident, different SSL style boards, we can pull that up here with the BrainWorks. So if I go in and let's actually go down to Plugin Alliance. Now, granted, they have a lot, but you can see here, Focusrite console. We have the console N, so Neve, SSL-E, SSL-G, and SSL-9000J. We have these different consoles that we can actually work with and kind of come up with the sound that we're looking for. So for example, if I pull up the E, take a look at that. So here it is, which we kind of have become accustomed to these colored knobs. We kind of understand, that's the SSL look. But again, we've got the filters here, we've got the compressor, expander, and or gating, and then we have our EQ section, and then the buttons to do all that kind of stuff. So another version of that, we come in here, let's scroll down into Waves. And of course, Waves makes their own version as well, all the way down here. And voila, the Waves version. I'm sure some of us have seen this version. Again, looks very similar to the BrainWorks idea, filters, and we've got our EQ, our dynamics, and our gate or expander, all this kind of stuff. So it's very similar in layout, basically just, again, emulating how that works. So with that said, how would we design this? What would we do? So we have to kind of think about how analog circuitry works or what we would do in that kind of situation. So in essence, we typically have the microphone that's out on the floor, which is going into a cable. That cable probably goes somewhere into into a wall box or into a patch bay of some kind. And then of course that cabling gets routed into, say, an actual patch bay, perhaps. And then from there, you can patch in, say, different preamps if you really wanted to before you ever reach the board. But eventually, it comes into the board that studio has. So again, whatever board that happens to be, it's coming into the input there. Now, on a lot of boards, and you can even find this for, say, like a live mixing board, like an analog board, they will have inserts. In fact, one of the first boards that I ended up using analog was an old, like a Mackie 24.2, and it had insert point on there. So you could actually insert things, and then inside the board, granted, you had to pull it open, but you could adjust where that insert was, so where it sat in the signal chain. And certain boards, of course, might allow you to do this depending on how they're set up. But the idea is that unless you're patching out, say, to, if you're patching out to, say, like an outboard preamp, let's say you've got a Neve board, but you want an API pre on something to get more of like a kind of like a smack and punch out of something. The circuitry from the mics running through all the cabling would come into the gain stage or the preamp of that specific board. From there, you might have an insert point, say if you want to send out and go to a compressor or go to outboard EQ or harmonic saturation, who knows what. And then it could come back in, and then of course you could run through the circuitry of the board. So you could run through the EQ, you could run through the dynamics, you can then of course go to the sends, and of course then to the fader, which is then sent to, say, like the master out, or sent to a group or another bus or something along those lines. But that's kind of the idea. So now we can design this inside the computer. So if we jump back in, I'll use a kind of a blend here, but we'll go with VMR. So again, and we'll kind of lay this out. So let's say we go from our microphone. Our microphone comes into our board, and we'll say we're going to go into a Neve board. So let's say we wanted to use the Neve actual preamp that the board has. And then it goes into, say, again, into here, which is the EQ. And then we would run through that circuitry of that channel that it's in. So now we have, a microphone going into the preamp, going into EQ, which then leads us into the rest of the circuitry of that channel before it gets sent out somewhere else, whether we're going, say, into a tape machine, or we're going straight into Pro Tools, or we're sending that to a bus. There are all kinds of stuff that we can do from this point. But let's say we didn't want to use the preamp here. We want to use something different. So we could get rid of that, and instead we could pull in something, scroll back up here, like this. So the 76, so a tube pre, so we could do something along these lines. So now we're bypassing the preamp of the board because we're going to an outboard piece. We're saying, okay, I don't want the preamp there. I want to actually patch in something different. Same thing with the EQ. Let's say, well, you know what? Maybe we leave the EQ, but we don't touch it, but we want to use something different. Let's grab an API styled EQ and throw that in instead. So now we're still running through the circuitry of the board. We're just not actually using any of the EQ. It's still there. It still exists when we're patching in, unless, of course, the board is designed that you can bypass that. Otherwise, there it is. It would still be right there. So now we can run through a different preamp, bypassing the preamp completely of the board, running into a different EQ. And then, of course, we're still going through the EQ. We're just not touching it, and then going through the actual channel itself. Now, with some other plugins, like I'll pull up the Brainworks again, for example, just as an example, we'll pull up the Neve one. Now, they don't really kind of give you that option to break out. Now, does that necessarily mean that, oh, this cannot be used to build an exact replica of what it would be like in an analog, in a big name studio? No, not at all. We could still patch things in. It just, it will change a little bit, but it's not going to change drastically enough to really make a difference. But again, this depends on how picky you want to be. If you want to be extremely picky and say, no, it has to be this exact way, then, you might have to kind of do some searching and figure out what plugins are going to work best for you. Otherwise, you could slap something like this on and say, look, I just recorded through a Neve board. I've got the circuitry modeling right here. I don't need the full board. This is going to get me close enough. So there are definitely options there. Now, again, we could add in other things. Let's say we wanted to patch out to a compressor. We want to go out to a compressor before our EQ. We could then throw this in here like that. So now we've got a microphone going into a preamp, which then goes into a compressor. This happens to be like a blue stripe of an 1176. And then we finally end up into our EQ and then going through the rest of the board. So there's some cool ability to kind of build this. Now, you don't have to do it here. Let's say we'll get rid of these. Let's say here, we just wanted to run through the mic and, of course, the preamp here, but then we wanted to go into something else. So now we want to go into a different board or something along those lines, or maybe even a different dynamics processor. So we'll go in here, and let's say we had this patched in and we want to go to like an LA2A, but we didn't want to use the one from Slate. We want to use the one, say, here from Avid. Now here's the Avid version, because we like the sound of this plugin versus the one that Slate Digital made, or the one that Cakewalk made, or the one that Universal Audio made, or whatever. You have your ones that you enjoy. Or you're just like, I want a very specific one. So let's scroll down here. And I want, where are you? Boom, right here. I want the Purple Audio 76 style. So this is Plugin Alliance, or maybe we want something similar, but not quite that one. We want the purple, but we want another, again, a different version. We've got the Avid version of the same thing. So you can literally build anything you want. Now, keeping in mind that if you want to continue in an analog workflow, eventually you're going to run through the circuitry of that specific board, and then from there you have a choice. So microphone, preamp, let's go into, we'll just pick a standard, there, an Avid version, and then we need to go into an EQ of some kind. Let's say we wanted to go into an Electra, like this. So now we've got something from Kush Audio. So this is one of their 500 series, or I believe they also make this in a full rack version. I mean, of course, and then of course they have the plugins as well. But now we're going to an Electra EQ instead. So now we've got microphone into preamp, into compressor, into another EQ, and then we need to make our way back into a board. And let's just say, for example, we were working on an SSL board. Voila, now we have this board, all the channeling, you know, all the EQ, everything like that going in. We may not touch the EQ or not, who knows, because again, you can turn it in and out, like in and out, off and on right there. Now from there, we have a decision to make. Where are we going from there? Now, of course, we can send this out. We can do a bus. Let's say we were sending this to a group of some kind. Let's say, you know, we're working on the drums. So we're going to send all the drums to a bus, and we're going to use that, say, as like a dirty bus, as like a crush bus or something. So we can send that out to a bus 1 and 2, and then we can throw like an 1176 on there, put it in all buttons in mode, and then crush it, and we can blend that in. Otherwise, again, we're talking about analog, this would either then go into converters, which are then transferred into Pro Tools, or, depending on the studio, it could go to tape. Now, that's kind of how it was done before digital. You know, it all went to tape, and then that tape would either get sent off, say, to a mixing engineer, and they would bring it back in, or do something along those lines, or, as some studios do now, they still print through the tape. So they actually send everything through the tape machine, through actual tape, and of course there's a delay, but then it would be sent from there, outputted from the tape machine, and then into Pro Tools. So that way it gives us an easier deliverable when we're sending out to other studios or other engineers, etc. So in order to do that, we can of course pull up a tape machine. So here we have the virtual tape machine, and we have a few different settings on here. As you can see over here, if we look at the machine type, we have a 2-inch 16-track or a 1/2-inch 2-track. Well, we're not going to a master, right? We're not sending this out to a left and right. We need to actually send this out individually. So what we would need to do is change this to 16-track. Now, granted, your mix might have more than 16 tracks, which is totally fine. They just grouped these tape machines together and put them in sync. So they would have, say, 2 16 tracks together, or 3 16 tracks together, or maybe they had a 24 track and they put 2 of those together. They would literally just sync them up so that they could record all the tracks. But again, we're running through it. Then, of course, you can pick a tape type, and of course, you can pick a speed. Normally, they record, 13 inches per second, and get nice, clean, high fidelity going into the tape. But from here, where do we go? So again, we've got mic into preamp. That preamp then sends to our compressor that we like. That's a piece of outboard. We also continue in outboard gear going to an Electro, which would be an EQ. From there, we finally come back here into the console. Maybe using the compressor or the expander or gating, maybe not. Maybe we use this EQ again if we want to. Otherwise, we're just, of course, running through the circuitry of this board. And then out of that board, we then come into the tape machine. And now where do we go? Well, this is one signal chain, right? We've created one full signal chain. So from beginning of where the sound's coming from, so from the microphone, from whatever source we're recording, onto a medium, so onto tape, or say through tape into the actual, into Pro Tools or something like that, so we can deliver it. So from there, we would actually probably bring this in on another board. So again, if this is coming from, for example, coming from another engineer, from a recording engineer, a tracking engineer, going to a mixing engineer, they're probably going to pull it up on their board. Now, most likely they're going to bypass their preamp because they don't need to amplify anything. Everything has been amplified, but they're bringing it from, say, either from their tape machine. So they, of course, are pulling it off of tape, or they're pulling it out of Pro Tools, and then they're going into their board, especially if they're a hybrid mixer, most likely into some form of a board. So let's say that they're going and they're mixing on a Neve board. So let's go find that one. So now we're going through another board. We recorded through a mic, a pre, some outboard, and then of course we record through an SSL board into tape machine, whatever, went to Pro Tools. Now it's coming to the mix engineer, and the mix engineer has their own board, and they happen to have a Neve board that they really, really enjoy to mix through. So now it's going through the circuitry of this board. So this is a lot of saturation, a lot of coloration that's going on, because again, we're going through two completely different setups. This isn't a bad thing at all. This is in fact really awesome, because now this mixing engineer, of course, is running through the circuitry of their setup, and they possibly might have outboard that they want to use. Maybe they're the ones that create, like a send for guitars going out to analog reverb, or maybe they're doing or using some kind of outboard EQ or something along those lines, so they can patch in what they want from here. And of course, if this was coming from straight analog, they pulled it in from tape and they're sending it through the board, sending it through whatever analog gear that they have, into something. Let's say they, again, we'll pull up this and let's go down here. Let's say like this, they happen to really enjoy a Pultec style EQ, and that's what they're going to use. They're going to patch that into their board. So this is, again, we've gone through the mic, the pre, compressor, EQ that was outboard, in through a console to tape. The new engineer then brings it into their console. They throw on some EQ that they like. And then this is where the mixing engineer gets to send it out to stereo, right? To a stereo track. So from there, they get to go wherever they're going. So for example, I have this set to a submaster. So over here, we've got our submaster. So here, this is, let's say they had something set up for like a mix bus, for example. We'll just kind of design something along those lines, but I will grab the virtual mix rack again. So they're working on an Neve board, right? Let's pull up VCC mix bus. So again, this is the busing that's happening. So they're, of course, running through the circuitry of their bus. But perhaps they have other things going on before that. Maybe they were running out to other things. So we'll just move this down for a second. Let's say they happen to be, or they have a piece of outboard. I don't know if I have it in here. Go here. So let's say they happen to have an SSL style bus compressor, something like that. So they're running through this, and from, or maybe that's further down. Again, we can design this any way we want. Let's go. Let's say they own the Cush Clairphonic on the mid-side version. So now they're going, again, from their board in EQ, busing over to their stereo bus, their left and right, that go out to the speakers. And now they've got their outboard patched in. So they've got, say, a Clairphonic. They've got, let's throw in one more. Let's say like a, trying to think of what I would put on there. Actually, here, we'll do this. We'll do the clairphonic into the gray. We'll grab Charlie. Hey, look at that. Stereo amplifier. So this here. So again, so now, as it loads, the mixing engineer gets to run through their board, their outboard, whatever they decide, an EQ, a compressor, which of course is like that running through the circuitry of that. And then of course the last thing, the last few things, so I can find it. Show up. There it is. They're going, let's say, printing back into tape. Now, of course, they may not do this. They might just emulate this like what we're doing here. But then, like, so with this, they would then go to half-inch 2-track because they've summed everything down on their board, coming down to 2-track. You know, let's maybe say they're running at 15 IPS to get a little bit more, you know, grit, punch, or just analog goodness. And they're going to a different tape. And of course, from there, we're going out to a stereo amplifier, etc. if we wanted to. Don't have to do that, but something along these lines. So look at all this processing. I mean, I know this is kind of a lot, but again, mic into preamp, which, you know, you could even emulate that. Let's say you were just running a standard microphone, you know, into one of your clean pre's, but you could still emulate that into, of course, you know, your tracking sounds. So you've got, you know, slight EQ, slight compression, you know, maybe a little bit here on the desk, but running through the desk. That gets sent through a tape machine. Then it goes to the next engineer. So you've tracked everything you have. Now you go to the next engineer. That engineer then runs it through his board or her board, their board. They run it through their board, and they do their EQs and etc. that they want to do. Maybe they've got extra compression or something like that. And then it finally ends up maybe through their signal chain, through their tube bus, if they happen to have one. And then maybe they print it back through tape as well. So again, we've got EQ, we've got compression into, you know, the final circuitry of their board out to the tape. And there it is. So does this matter? Like, does all of this make a difference? Well, absolutely, it makes a difference because you're getting all of the slight, as I push it, the slight harmonics and things from that. So if we solo this up, this is just a kick. Again, kick, which we're just sending through these two here. I'll see if I can actually take these all on once, if it'll let me. It's just being funky right now. Come on, you. Oops. There we go. Now, if I do this across every channel, which will be a little funky because it's going to be going through a 47, but we can kind of get the idea. See if I can do all of these at once here. We'll just start with the drums. We'll take all of these off. Now again, I'm gonna do that. The new one. I'm just leaving this on here because I'm just gaining and just doing a little bit of EQ work there, or not EQ, but flipping the polarity. But all right, so we have something like this. Okay, let's get all the drums soloed up. So again, this is just a mic and a pre, right? So again, microphone, preamp across pretty much everybody. You can kind of see here. And let's go ahead and actually get rid of, yeah, I'll move this down so we're not, there we go. So I can take these all in and out, right? So just mic and a pre. So again, it's there. Now, granted, I probably wouldn't do this, but this kind of gives you the idea of what's actually happening here. You know, of course, we can do the same thing. Like if I pull the console back up and let's see here, I go ahead and throw this across. I'm just going to run through here, as you can see here real quickly, just selecting different channels and just randomizing everything. So that way they're not all on the same channel. Again, they've got that modeling inside to make them all sound just a little bit different, which does make a difference, trust me. It's just going through and picking some random numbers. Okay. So I'll leave the mics off. We'll try just the console here. I'm adjusting some things here so we're not taking things in and out. Okay, so let's see what happens here. So again, we're just going to activate and deactivate the console. Yeah, it's subtle, it's slight, but things like this add up, especially when you do all of them. When you have all of these going at once, it's going to add up and it's going to make quite the difference. So let's add the tape machine into this mix. Now, of course, the tape machine has a little bit of saturation and etc. on there. We're going to have to do a different one right here. Virtual tape machine. Okay, we had this set to 16, 30 IPS. Everything looks pretty good. Okay, so we'll take these out. Okay, I'll start again. This up. Okay. We'll just take them in and out. So here we go. Again, it's subtle, but the kick has more point to it and things just kind of give a little bit of more depth. You can kind of just feel there's energy there. So all of this stuff starts to add up when you start adding it all together. You know, it really does make a difference. So if I throw this across everything, oops, now I have to go through the these consoles too, but you kind of get the idea here that little moves make a big difference. I'm not going to do the compressor or the EQ, just or the other EQ, for example. In fact, we'll take all of these off. Oops. Just because. You're not hearing any of this. Let's move this stuff down. Okay. So here we go. So this is again running through an SSL into tape as if we were recording it that way, and then it was sent to another engineer, which is running it through their Neve desk, and a little EQ, whatever. Again, like I'm not actually doing anything here. We're just running through the circuitry, but we'll get a feel for it. So here we go. So it just adds just some flavor in there and just some coloration. Of course, we're getting some kind of, we're getting a little bit of ducking and stuff in there too, but you kind of get the idea. The sum of making all of these choices really does make a difference. It really starts to add up and really starts to color and create this beautiful sound. And it's a whole new world because we can do this stuff now with the computer. Yes, it is so nice to go and spend the money and spend the time in the studio. It's an experience, and I would never, ever say, don't go do it. It's amazing. It's an amazing experience to go record and get to be around the gear and the engineers and everyone that helps kind of create music for you, because at the end of the day, it's your music, right? And you are the final say in what happens in the creativity part, but they're there for more than just being a button pusher. If you want them to be, they can help sculpt and create sounds for you and give you options, and understand what you're going for, so that because they understand their gear, they should know exactly what to patch into or what to use to get the sound that you're looking for. And this is the great thing about going to a studio. They have the tools necessary to help you sculpt things right away. So you're not sitting there and taking the time of trying to figure out how to do it yourself. However, if you want to take the time to do it yourself, or let's say you don't always have the funds or want to put the money behind an album, you can start to create this stuff yourself. You can start to get an understanding of what this gear does. So perhaps if you do go to the studio, you can step in with a little bit better idea of what things do, so that way you can kind of maybe even have a notion of like, I want this sound and I think this might be able to do it. And the engineer might look at you and say, yes, that's exactly what I would go for too. Or it's like, well, actually, let's try this other thing first and see if it does it instead. But you can start to create and sculpt things beyond just EQ and compression. Yes, EQ and compression can do so much for you, but there are slight things, saturations and stuff that happen, that will change the way things sound and give you something that's a little basically wrong, right? And that's the whole beauty of analog, is that it's just a little bit off. It's not perfectly clean and clear and crisp like digital is. Like digital is great, especially for specific types of sounds or albums or music styles. We want that perfection, but sometimes having the wrongness of the sounds with analog, sometimes having that little bit of, I don't know, just funkiness helps kind of create, an atmosphere basically for your music, and helps you create something that isn't quite the same as anything else out there. So using this kind of technology and using these kinds of plugins can help you do that kind of thing. If we went in and let's say we actually turned the V gain up on a bunch of these, it's warning me that I'm going to turn them all up, but we can like gain these up a little bit on everybody. If I turn the all button on here, yes, thank you. Like that, it's changing everything. But we can actually set things like this. Let's say we'll take the gate out. It won't affect all of them, but we can go through and do this real quick so we can kind of get an idea. We can change the settings in here and really start to push things. Even like on the tape machine, for example, we could go in and change individual settings or set everything a certain way. to kind of get like a drive, basically a saturation, because saturation also does compression. So you're sculpting the sound, and you know, these plugins that are modeling boards or modeling preamps going to have EQ to them as well. They're going to maybe boost the lows a little bit more than would normally happen. You know, so there's things like that that could really change the way things are working. So here you can just see I'm turning off the expanders here. But again, like we've pushed the gain on the SSL a little bit, and it's going to help add some color. And you can stack these. You don't have to just stick with one. Like let's say you're modeling an SSL and you happen to have a Brainworks and a Waves and, you know, a Slate and an Apollo or whatever, like universal audio stuff. You can blend these to kind of almost overdo it. But in reality, like, you know, if these are modeled on super clean, pristine pieces of gear that are well maintained, but you go and record it at a studio that doesn't have that actually instead deals with like a board that hasn't been upkept as well, you know, this is going to make a huge difference. This is going to change the way things are. And you can actually push them beyond what you would normally expect. So here we'll take a listen to it again here. I boosted the gain up a little bit. Actually, let me check these are all ungrouped, but we'll get the idea here. Again, you can hear just slight changes. And again, we're not EQing. I don't have any EQ actually happening or anything like that. But because we're adding in the board, it's making a huge difference. So again, now these are just kind of guidelines of what you would typically do, how you would typically build an analog session, let's say. You know, going, like I said, going into a mic, into a pre, into, you know, EQ compression, whether that's outboard through the board itself, all the way down to tape, which is then sent to another engineer, which they run through their board and they go through their whole process. You know, but you don't have to follow these rules. These rules are, or I shouldn't say rules, guidelines. You can break all the guidelines. You're not going to break anything, especially like this. So feel free to get creative and do some things a little bit differently to add color. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what it looks like. It matters what it sounds like. We use our ears to mix, not our eyes. So don't be afraid to change this up a little bit or get funky with things. But know that if you understand how it typically works, how you typically go through the gear and how they typically got these sounds, then you have the ability to change it, to make it what you want it to be, and understand that this is all part of the creative process, that engineering, whether you're recording or you're mixing, is an art form in itself, and you are helping create the art by doing what you do. So don't be afraid to be creative and enjoy it. It's fun. So feel free to push things a little bit beyond what you think they should look like, or what you've maybe been told in the past by people telling you this is how to do this one thing. Because in the end, there is no right way. The only right way is what sounds good. So use your ears, have fun, build, create, saturate, make awesome stuff, and yeah, we'll see what comes out. Again, it's a creative process, so don't be afraid to get a little crazy with it. So I hope this answered any questions you might have ever had about kind of an analog workflow in a box, or kind of how it works. Now, of course, beyond this, it would go to a mastering engineer, and there's a bunch of stuff there that if that's something that you're ever interested in, more than happy to kind of go through and talk about. But hopefully this gives you a great idea of where you can go with your mixes and how you can continue to create some really cool stuff. So thanks for tuning in, or thanks for checking out the video. Again, I hope it was helpful. Again, we go and do this every Monday morning, 10 to 11 is basically what we shoot for. And of course, always feel free to leave comments or questions or anything down below in the comments section. And we'll be moving on with this series. We're going to start getting into actually mixing. We're just kind of spent this first month going through just to kind of understand, how this all works and what's actually happening here. So that way we can get a really good understanding of how to use the gear. So now we get to go have fun with the gear. So hope to see you next Monday if you can tune in at 10 a.m. If not, again, we'll see you when we see you. So have a great week, everyone. Catch you next time.